Hello, welcome to this webinar presenting our research on soft skills for international teamwork. The webinar is entitled All Fun and Games, referencing our serious game methodology that is innovative in training and research. My name is Anne Bartel-Reddick. I'm a professor of management at Sciences Po Grenoble and a member of the GenaGame laboratory.
And I am Danielle Taylor. I'm a PhD student in management at the University of Grenoble, also a member of the GenaGame laboratory. And I'm happy to share a game today, which is part of my doctoral research.
During our presentation, we'll present our research on soft skills for international teamwork in 4 steps. First, we introduce the soft skills that are necessary for successful global virtual teamwork. Then we present the InterCCom project, in which we develop serious games for training and research on these soft skills. We follow with the examples of 2 serious games, first to show how they can be used for innovative training on the example of Elite, the serious game. This game focuses on communication in a multilingual team. And the second example shows how we use these games for our research. Here we look at findings from Crit, the serious game on conflict management behavior in international teams.
So here we're talking about global virtual teams. Global virtual teams are teams whose members are dispersed geographically and in different time zones. Their team members are coming from different backgrounds, that is, different cultural and linguistic backgrounds, for example. And these teams are using digital information and technologies to communicate. When we're talking about global virtual teams, we're talking about teams that are not only in multinational companies, that is one example, but they're also in NGOs, international organizations, and even universities. They can be used for many different tasks, for specific projects or even activities. But it's really important to remember that these teams are relying on digital information and communication technologies, because this has an important influence on their communication and especially on how people should be communicating within these teams. Of course, we should say that global virtual teams are not new. They've actually been studied and used for many decades, but in the past couple of years, of course, they've skyrocketed due to the pandemic. Successful global virtual teamwork does require specific soft skills. People with different cultures, languages, and contexts are coming together. When we're looking at diversity, for example, we can look at cultural diversity, but we could also look at language diversity. This is looking at, for example, people that are from different mother tongues and different native languages, or maybe they have different proficiency levels in the common language, such as English. Of course, English is not the only common language in global virtual teams. There are also a lot of other contexts that we could look at. In any case, we're looking at how these teams are achieving their objectives. They must communicate, they must share knowledge, make decisions, and manage conflicts. And all of this requires some very special skills and competencies, such as intercultural competence, communication skills, and global leadership. If we look at intercultural competence, for example, we are looking at the ability to understand cultural differences and adapting our behavior to those very specific situations. If we're looking at communication skills, for example, we're not only looking at what language we're learning, but how we're communicating in that language. This is even important for native speakers of English, for example, to adapt their language to the group. Maybe they should simplify some expressions, for example. And of course, global leadership within this context becomes its own unique thing. These competencies and skills have long been studied and they're quite well known, but this virtual and distant collaboration raises some very specific challenges. When we're communicating by email, maybe something is missing in our communication. When we're talking by a video call, maybe we're having trouble understanding each other in a different way than we would if we were in person. So we know that these skills are necessary for working in global virtual teams, but acquiring them and studying them is really not so obvious. So there is a need for new approaches in pedagogy and research in this area. Traditional teaching methods, where theoretical information is just delivered in a lecture style, is really not enough. We can look at cultural dimensions, such as differences in interpreting time, hierarchy, or the group. These are well known by scholars, but learners are still struggling to understand how to implement this knowledge, how to appropriate them within a very specific work context. Similarly, trainers are often conscious about the limits that these learners are struggling with, and they are searching for more impactful and practical training material. On the other hand, if we look at researchers, we also have some limitations. Traditional research methods have limitations in analyzing the acquisition or the extent of such skills in very specific contexts. For example, we can look at surveys and research interviews as traditional research methods. When answering a survey, people sometimes think about different situations and contexts depending on their personal experience. Or maybe they're lacking objectivity in describing their behavior and feelings, which can create bias. With research interviews, there are also limits, especially when participants are trying to respond in a certain way, when they're responding how they think the interviewer wants them to respond. So due to these limitations, research on soft skills in global virtual teams has remained somewhat stagnant for some time.
That is why we have created the InterCom project in 2018. We work in a large international team of professors and researchers, and we started developing a first game on cultural differences and intercultural competence. The project continued to grow, and today we are studying several topics in international management. We have developed 5 online games. They are serious games, which means that their primary purpose is for learning, even if it is in a playful way. From our experience creating these games, we have also developed a method for creating serious games in general. Our games are single-player online games that are implemented on a game platform, a website called GenaGame, that we also developed within the InterCom project. Therefore, we can now quite easily create additional games because no technical skills or IT development is required of the game creator. The principles of the games are to simulate real-life international virtual teamwork. The player takes on the role of the coordinator of an international team, and each game follows a different scenario where the player's choices influence the future teamwork events to some extent. Learning from the games follows the principles of experiential learning, such as described by Kolb. While playing, the learner will watch relevant international interactions and is required to take action, and therefore has to think about the situations. As the team coordinator, the learner is actively taking part in the teamwork, and the team members' reaction will bring about emotions and feelings. And within the game, we also provide feedback that the player will then watch in a second learning cycle, reflecting on their experience and decisions within the game. And through this simulated experience, we try to make the participants and players learn from the games. As mentioned, we had to develop our own platform, the GenaGame platform, because available software tools were lacking some of the functions we were looking for, among which the options for multiple pathways, different stories, different paths the story can take depending on the player's choices. Another function we absolutely needed is recording every choice a player makes throughout the game and export these data, which are key for the related research projects in order to analyze the players' behaviors within the games. And another important function for us is to control the access to the games for controlling the samples we include in our research projects. The InterCCom game collection currently includes 5 different games on different topics. The first game we started developing in the large team is LINK, the series game. LINK stands for Learning Intercultural Competence. The second game we followed up with is Manage Your Management, MIM, the series game. It's about corporate social responsibility and responsible behavior in international management contexts. CRIT, the series game, stands for conflict resolution in international teams. So I'll present more in detail this game and the research a little bit later. Danielle will present more about Elite, the series game on communication and leadership. And the 5th game is under development currently, which is SOS, which stands for Share or Skip a knowledge request from a coworker. So it's about knowledge management and knowledge sharing.
So now we'll talk more in depth about 2 of those games, as Anne said. I'll start by talking about Elite, and then she'll expand on CRIT. So welcome to Elite, the serious game. This is a game that I have worked to develop along with the help of Anne, as well as Isabelle Corbett-Etchevers, as part of my PhD research. I am using it to collect data and explore some specific research questions about language diversity in online teams. Today, my goal is actually not to discuss the research questions, but rather to present Elite, the serious game from the player's point of view. That is, as a player, what do you experience and learn? And I'd like to invite you to play, to experience our games for yourself. So let me tell you what this game is all about. In Elite, the serious game, like the others in our collection, you will be playing a single player game where you are immersed in a specific scenario and you are tasked with completing a specific mission. Here it is coordinating a global virtual team to organize an event, specifically a product launch event in Thailand. The team members that you play with that are part of your team are predetermined. They come from the UK, the USA, France, Portugal, Brazil, and Thailand. Within the game, you will be organizing meetings, designating tasks, responding to requests from the CEO of the company. You will be using different communication channels to talk with your team members, to relay messages. And ultimately, you're going to be making important decisions that influence your path through the game. What that means is that no 2 players will have the same exact experience within the game. It's adapted to you and to your choices. Elite, the serious game, is organized in 5 game phases, followed by some final feedback and your score. The phases follow the event organization project that starts from the very start of the team, the formation of the team, when the team is getting to know each other and starting to work together, until the very end of the project, even past the project when the team is starting to, or is finishing by evaluating their success. Of course, everything can't go smoothly. There are some problems that you have to address as your work goes along, both from within the team and other external factors that are influencing your team's success. Throughout the game, you do receive some information about how to improve your leadership skills within the team. For example, you'll learn about some specific cultural differences of your team members. but also you'll receive some advice for creating cohesion among your team members, for example. And finally, at the end of the game, you will receive your scores. These scores reflect the appropriateness of the choices that you have made regarding leadership and communication. You'll also receive some specific recommendations regarding a number of communication strategies that will help you improve your skills for working in and communicating in global virtual teams. So for example, what are those communication strategies? You'll receive some more information about when should you or should you not use other languages besides the common language, in this case, English. How do you build your understanding of other cultures while maintaining the sensitivity and not stereotyping people? When should you use email or video call or phone call? And in what circumstances? And for example, are emoji acceptable in professional communication? If you found the idea of Elite the Serious Game interesting and you would like to learn more about yourself, including your leadership style, how you're communicating, and receive some information and recommendations about how to improve your communication in an international team, well, then I would like to invite you to play Elite the Serious Game. We are accepting players now for our current session of the game. In addition to participating and learning about yourself, you'll also be helping us advance our research and especially my PhD project on language diversity in virtual teams. For the research side of things, we are collecting player data to understand how players are responding in specific situations within the game. So please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
So as I said earlier, CRIT, the serious game, is about conflict management. It stands for conflict resolution in international teams. CRIT was built mostly by Somjai Siritrakanki within her PhD. And here are some aspects on her research and some of the findings we were able to come up with based on the data we collected through the game. All teams face conflict situations. But conflict is inevitable, always happens and can sometimes have positive consequences because if we confront our different opinions, maybe we can come up with better solutions also. So sometimes it can be positive, but most of the time and escalating conflict is really critical, can really be problematic. So handling teamwork, managing conflict situations appropriately is really critical for teamwork success. That's the starting point where we left from. But what is not or was not sufficiently known by research is different research questions and sub-questions. We wondered whether there are cultural differences in preferred conflict management styles. Do people handle conflict in the same way across countries? Well, we can suppose that no, but we were still lacking detailed insights into what cultural differences may occur and may be observed in conflict situations. Another sub-question of the research was, do people change their behavior, their conflict management behavior with interlocutors from a different culture? When you manage a conflict with somebody from your own country and culture, do you behave in the same way than when you're involved in an international conflict situation? And we also looked at other variables that might influence conflict management, such as emotional intelligence, international experience, especially for international conflicts. Does more international experience help to better manage international conflicts, and also various demographic data. the players that are featured in the story, in the scenario of the series game, are from France, from Thailand, and the USA. So it's a small team where the player is the fourth person and the coordinator of the team. And the sample on which we collected the data, so the people who participated in the study by playing the game, are also from these three countries, from France, from Thailand, and the USA. So that in some conflict scenes, there were 18 different scenes on different types of conflict in the game. So some were relational conflict, when different personal values might conflict in the game or be confronted to each other. And other scenes are task conflict scenes, meaning disagreements on how to do the job and manage the situation, and not so much about the people involved. So 18 scenes. And within these 18 scenes, as the sample were from 3 countries and the other featured players also from the 3 countries, in 1/3 of the situations, the player is interacting with somebody from his or her country, and in the 2 other thirds of the situation is interacting with people from different cultures. Well, for French players, for example, with people from Thailand or from the USA. So the players are confronted to these conflict situations and can then choose between different answers, different conflict management styles. And these styles have been defined based on the model of Hammer from 2005. His model is based on 2 dimensions. One dimension is direct and indirect communication, whether people communicate in a very direct or indirect way, directly expressing what the problem is or their point of view, or concerning the problem to some extent. And the second dimension is the expressiveness of emotions to people. One aspect of conflict that creates you some emotional reaction, and in general, people are not so happy about conflict. And these emotions, do you express them in your way of answering the people you're in conflict with, or do you rather restrain or hide your emotions? So Hammer comes up with 4 different conflict styles, conflict management styles, depend on how these dimensions are combined on direct and indirect communication and expressiveness of emotion. So the players can choose between different styles when reacting, answering the problem they're confronted with in the situation. So what did we find out? What did we come up with? It's very interesting that we learned quite a few counterintuitive results. They're not counterintuitives, but in opposition with several elements of the literature. So what we thought we knew so far about conflict management in international environments is to a certain extent contradicted by our results, which also shows that these experimental research designs, where people are put into the situation and making them react to more or less real life situations, is an interesting way of doing research and collecting data, instead of asking people how would you react if you were confronted to a situation or so. So first element we learned here is that most people prefer the accommodation style, which is based on indirect communication and restraining their emotions. So more or less 60%, 2/3 of the participants prefer to react in this way, more indirect, less emotional. Something that is very interesting, I think, is that we found a lot of similarities in the behaviors of French and Thai participants, while the US Americans who participated in the research reacted quite differently. So this does not fit what we can read in the literature about Western and Eastern or cultures or Occidental cultures. We could have expected that the French and the US show more similarities, and the Thai is an East Asian culture behaving in a more different way, which is not the case in our findings. The US American subsample, the US Americans are the most indirect and the most emotional in their response to the conflict situations, which is also completely contradicting the literature on cultural differences, where you can read that US Americans have a more direct style in communicating, and as an individualistic culture are not going emotional and in work situations. So this is quite opposite, or to some extent opposite to the literature. Another interesting aspect is also that US Americans are more emotional, well, mostly indirect and emotional, and when they interact with interlocutors from a foreign culture, they become more direct in their expression. So among Americans, more indirect, and somehow more direct with international team members. We can also observe that people act more emotionally with interlocutors from a different cultural background. This is also an interesting finding, where we can also see a link between our different games and topics with intercultural competence. It also shows that intercultural international situations are somehow particular and maybe require specific skills and competencies to handle them and to regulate your emotions, which are more expressed by these participants and players here. We also found that people with more international experience and higher levels of education are more direct and less emotional in their way of managing conflict, which maybe shows, maybe we can read there a better way of handling conflict, but which was not one of our objectives. We're not judging here which is the best way of handling conflict, but we can observe that people with more experience and high levels of degrees are more direct than others. And we also measured emotional intelligence of the participants, and we can also see that emotional intelligence plays a strong role and significantly influences the way people manage conflict in these international settings. That's all for today. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to contact us if you want to learn more. You have our contact data. And as Daniel said earlier, if you're interested in participating in the research related to Elite, the serious game, please contact us, and you will learn more about the research itself, as well as we didn't show everything in this webinar, what the research is about. So yeah, thank you for listening, and we're looking forward to follow up.
Thank you.